All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this seminar today, webinar actually. We are all online from the University of California, East Bay. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting the presentation of Professor Sophie Scott. She's going to present on the science of laughter. And Professor Scott is a professor of cognitive neuroscience. She's a specialist in speech communication, and we are all here to her presentation. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen. I'm looking, here we go. No, I'm finding the wrong. It's always exciting, this bit, isn't it? Where someone pathetically scrolls around going, where's my talk? I've lost my talk. Okay, it's this one. Let's try this. Right. Great, can you see that? Okay, excellent. So I'm going to talk about some scientific reasons why laughter is funny. So I am going to talk about the science of laughter. Well, one of the things that's interesting about the science of laughter is there's very, very little of it. There, if I go into Web of Science and I put in the search terms emotion, expression, fear, I'll get back well over 4,000 papers. And if I switch out fear for laughter and just search emotion, expression, laughter, I'll get a few hundred papers. And most of those are clinical cases where somebody is presenting with unusual or abnormal laughter. So why is laughter ignored so much? There's huge amounts of work in psychology and neuroscience looking at emotion. Why is there so little on laughter? And I'm going to argue that this is in part because laughter actually is a bit strange, and in some ways it's a bit different from other emotional expressions. So first of all, why is laughter funny? Well, when we laugh, we make some really peculiar noises. And laughter is actually more like an animal call than it is like speech. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this. So this is running our MRI machine as a video camera that lets us look at what's happening inside someone's vocal tract when they're speaking. So here you can see someone talking. You can see, if you look at the tongue, how continuously the tongue is sort of jumping around and reshaping. You've got these fine movements of the lips, the jaw is moving up and down. You've got the voice box, the soft palate at the back of the throat there. And all this is adding up to giving us, well, it's probably the most complex sound in nature. There's really actually no other sound in nature like human voice and human speech. Incredible complexity, and it's coming about from all these very fine movements. Now, in contrast, if we look at the same woman laughing, what you see is something completely different. So the tongue is just sitting at the bottom of the mouth. She's opening her mouth. And then she's making noise at her voice box. She's moving up and down a lot, and I'll show you why in a second. But this is basically how all other mammals vocalize. They just make a noise at the voice box and then open their mouths. There's none of that complexity of those fine movements that you were seeing for speech. So laughter is, it's really hard to talk over. So laughter is a peculiar sound in that it is like an animal call. Literally, it is made in the same way as other mammals vocalize, and it's sharing none of the complexity with speech. Now, that's not specific to laughter. In fact, when you make any kind of non-verbal emotional expression, like a scream of horror or a disgusted sound, those are still much more like animal calls than they are like speech. So laughter has definitely producing some funny noises because it's kind of via this evolutionarily older network. And sometimes laughter is funny because sometimes when we laugh, we can't help it. If you think back to the last time you were laughing and you could not stop laughing, what was happening there was you were producing an involuntary vocalization. Now, that may also be the case with other emotions. You can produce an involuntary scream. I was doing a bit of recording for the BBC a couple of years ago in a chemistry lab, and something that wasn't supposed to explode exploded, and I made a real kind of oh sound like that, which completely came from nowhere, and I sounded completely surprised, and I was surprised, and it was an involuntary vocalization. Now, the difference between voluntary and involuntary vocalizations are, again, something that we find in humans. Now, human speech, human voices, when we do controlled things with our voice, like talk or beatbox or sing, what you get are this activation of brain networks. So this is just showing you, if we look here at the one in pink, that's the left-hand side of a human brain. Can I just ask, can you see my mouse when I move my mouse? You can, cool. So that's the left side of the brain, that's the front, that's the back. And what you're seeing here when people talk is there's lots of activation, auditory parts of the brain, you're hearing your voice, visual parts of the brain, you're seeing the words that you're reading aloud. And you get these big areas running down what's called sensory motor cortex, which are actually controlling the articulators. So your ability to speak at all is because of these brain areas. And if you damage these brain areas, you can have great difficulty talking. Now, that is voluntary control. Even if it doesn't feel like you're voluntary, you're choosing every word that you want to say when you're talking, your engagement of that network is under your voluntary control. In contrast, involuntary vocalizations, like laughter can be, they're associated again with this older involuntary network. So vocalizations in most other mammals are reactive. They happen in response to something. They're not an animal just deciding to make a noise. And what you're seeing here is that sitting in this older network. So rather than these lateral areas that are controlling voluntary articulation, you have this midline structure. So this is the middle of the brain here, the anterior cingulate, which projects down through the periaqueductal gray to the brainstem and then directly controlling the articulators. So what happens with involuntary vocalizations is these things are being fired off via a completely different network from voluntary vocalizations. And sometimes that means that the two networks are in strong competition with one another. Now, the laughter, the particular example of laughter, if we look at laughter, do you remember I showed you that woman lying in the scanner and she was laughing and she was actually moving up and down a lot? And that's because laughter is primarily associated with big changes in how you use your rib cage. Now, your rib cage is something that you're all using at the moment to stay alive. You're pulling air in and out of your lungs with it. And if I was just to measure the expansion and contraction of your chest as you're breathing, you get this rather nice smooth movement. You're all doing it, don't stop. As soon as we start talking, you get a very different profile. Human beings breathe totally differently when we speak. It's part of that voluntary control. And what we do now is we control very carefully the amount of air flowing out through our lungs with these muscles. And that's actually giving us the ability to make a noise at the voice box. And then here, the person's taking a big breath. So that's me actually trying to talk. And then as long as I can do that, taking another breath. And then you'll notice something funny is happening here. And that's because I start laughing. So these are the same breath contraction, same chest movement, just expansion and contraction of the chest wall, breathing, talking and laughing. And look how different laughter is. When you start laughing, you start producing very, very big contractions of these muscles between the ribs. Very big, very fast, much bigger than anything you do when you're breathing, much faster than anything you do when you're breathing or you're talking. And so laughter is actually making a sound primarily just by squeezing air out of you. Now, remembering and squeezing it out quite quickly, remembering that this could be involuntary. Sometimes when somebody is talking, you hear these voluntary and these involuntary networks starting to interact with each other. And I've got an example of this here. This is a woman reading the news on the BBC, on the flagship BBC news program on the radio in the morning, and she hears something that makes her laugh, and you'll hear her voice starts to change as she starts to laugh, because this involuntary network that wants to make you laugh starts to overwhelm this talking network. So there's a lot to get from this. There's a guy who's coming down the line. He's not in the studio, he's on a phone, and he's talking about a popular chief of staff, and it's a French name, Jacques Toit. Now, twat is quite a rude word. Where I come from in the UK, it's a very rude word, and he just goes for it. Nothing to see here. Popular chief of staff, Jack Twat. Back in the studio, someone whispers at the woman who's about to start reading the news, and what she whispers is, what she whispers is, Jack Twat. And what she's trying to do is to make this woman laugh. And at first, she's okay. She starts talking about the whale in the Firth of Forth. And then she starts losing control of the pitch of her voice, as what's happening is the breath control is starting to be taken from her by the laughter. And then the pitch of her voice shoots right up. And by the end, she starts making squeaking noises, although she stopped talking because now she's completely laughing. Now, if you're not a British speaker of English, or a native English speaker, you may have listened to that and thought she was starting to cry. But there's still kind of cultural things that will influence your perception of this. But you heard some kind of emotion come into her voice, and that's that involuntary network at work. I saw the note about the volume, and I've turned it up a bit. Okay, do you want to hear it again? It's not playing at the moment. There we go.
Rock's unpopular replacement has now been dismissed, with the Army's popular Chief of Staff, Jack Twat, taking over.
A 40-foot sperm whale, which was stranded in the Firth of Forth for more than 4 days, is now thought to be swimming towards open waters again. It freed itself late last night. Marine experts are hoping to establish this morning whether the whale is finally back at sea. Good luck to the whale. 8.
Okay. The other thing that's quite interesting there is she talks on the radio for a living, and the BBC does not like its news reporters or its sports broadcasters showing emotion in the voice. They will get in trouble for it. And that's how powerful laughter is. Once it's started, she actually can't stop doing it, although she doesn't want to, and she'll get in trouble. Another reason why laughter is quite funny and quite interesting is the laughter is a universal emotional expression. And what I mean by that is that it's an emotion, as far as we can see, that is recognized in all human cultures. And that's not true of all human emotions. Many human emotions, in fact, are very culturally specific. Now, to establish this, my PhD student, Disa Sota, did several trips out to Namibia in the early noughties, where she was working with members of the Himba tribes who lived in very, very northern Namibia. So they weren't having interactions with, they hadn't met people from Europe or even from outside of northern Namibia before. They didn't have contact with people outside of their own community. And they also have, they don't have a written culture, and they don't have any electricity, so they're not being exposed to examples of emotions being expressed by people from other cultures. So if they recognize emotional expressions from people back in London and vice versa, that would give us an idea about the extent to which any of this is being universally recognized. And for context, there's been quite a lot of work asking this question, but it's all been done in the past with faces. So this was the first study to try and do it with voices, vocal expressions of emotion. We also got the Himba to generate different emotional expressions for us. So see if you can understand what emotion this guy's expressing. Now, you get no prizes for spotting that at the end there he started laughing, and it probably sounded very recognizable to you. The emotion he was expressing at the start of that was actually triumph, a celebration. Now, that's interesting because he knows what it means to celebrate something. Celebration isn't an emotion that is so culturally specific to the West that other cultures couldn't necessarily recognize it. He has an understanding of celebration. His expression of it is completely different from the expressions that certainly we found in the UK. And that means it's not a universally recognized expression of emotion. So it's very culturally determined in how it's produced. In contrast, the laughter, very familiar. And indeed, that's what we found. If we compare the Himba listening to the English and the English listening to the Himba, what we found is that, as with the face, we're finding that emotions of anger, disgust, fear, sadness, and surprise are cross-culturally recognized. So if you get a bit of vomit on your hand in the middle of the Namibian desert and go, ugh, a Himba friend would know what you meant. In contrast, the only of the positive emotions that we studied, the only one that looked clearly like it was being cross-culturally recognized was laughter. The English recognized the Himba recognized the English. Now, you'll notice I haven't said what emotion is being expressed here. And actually, it's a good question. What emotion are we expressing when we laugh? If we go back to the guy who was the sort of the complete beginner of this entire field of research into emotions, which is Charles Darwin, he wrote a lot about all the emotions you can see here, and he was particularly interested in laughter, and he thought laughter was an expression of joy, and I'll come back to that. Another reason why, well, one of the reasons why Charles Darwin was interested in laughter was he was interested in emotions that actually might have an older evolutionary history for humans, i.e. you might find them in other animals, and consistent with that, you do find laughter in other animals. We are not the only animal that laughs. So you have to operationalize this. Okay, how do I know when I've seen laughter? What does that mean? And tickling is a very good way of getting laughter going. It works for getting human babies laughing. It also works for getting chimpanzees laughing. It even works getting rats laughing. And that's certainly, laughter has been now very well described in humans and other apes. And there's a whole literature on laughter in rats. And there's almost certainly more laughing animals to find out there. The interesting thing is, it seems to have these very strong associations initially in infancy with laughter during tickling, or games like peekaboo also work on humans. And that seems to be, that's interesting, because actually that's got nothing to do with humor. So when you first see laughter emerging, it seems to be more like a sort of social bonding behavior. Parents do something that makes the baby laugh, and that makes the parents laugh, and it's reinforcing the bond between the two. As we get older, laughter is very important for play behavior. So all mammals play when they're infants and juveniles, and some mammals play their whole lives, like humans and dogs and otters. Now, play is inherently an ambiguous behavior. The same behavior could be aggression or sexual, unless it's marked as being play. So mammals have these particular ways of showing that they're playing. They have what's called play face, these very loose, open, unthreatening mouths. Dogs, play is so important to dogs. They do things called a play bow. It means everything after this is a game. And when there is a sound associated with this, that's the sound of laughter. So Panksepp, who did the work with the rats, said at its heart, laughter is the sound of an invitation to play. And here's some play faces in primates. Very hard to get photographs of adult humans with play face. But again, it's a very, very similar role. So what you're seeing is that laughter is marking that your intentions are playful. You're inviting other people to play with you. And so that kind of chimes with Darwin's description of it as being to do with joy, but it's also suggesting that there's a social element to this. Another reason why laughter is funny is because we can catch laughter. So a lot of the laughter that you do happens just because somebody else is laughing. And that's because laughter is behaviorally contagious. This was something that we first kind of came across when we were doing some early brain scanning studies with laughter. And we found that when people hear laughter, you get activation in parts of the brain associated with moving your face into a smile or to making a noise, i.e., it looks like people are getting primed to laugh when they hear laughter. And then we looked into this literature on contagion and laughter and behavioral contagion, and there does seem to be this priming effect of laughter. You are very likely to laugh if you've heard somebody else laughing, particularly, mostly if you know that person. So it's something that happens in interactions where you're familiar with people. Now, I've got an example of laughter here. You're going to see two men in this video. This guy, the guy with the glasses, is about to hear something that makes him laugh. In fact, right from the outset, he looks like he's trying to control laughter. In contrast, his colleague, who you'll see in the next shot, isn't finding the same thing funny. In fact, if anything, looks quite worried and keeps flashing worried looks at his friend or his colleague, because he's worried that this is going to come across as rude. People are ringing in and singing religious songs, and this laughter may not be entirely appropriate. But in between, looking quite worried and trying to manage the situation, the other guy is continuously laughing and smiling, because that's just him chiming in with the laughter of the man sitting right next to him, who he knows. So that's contagious laughter at work. Watch this.
We're trying to get out there in the records and stuff. So we're just going to sing for you. I'm going to sing for you. In the midnight hour, yeah, you heard my cry. You brought up all of my tears.
Looks worried. Smile.
I'm still loving
Really concerned look in a second.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Real worry then.
I was actually, I certainly did enjoy that. He's caught up in the spirit. He's getting the Holy Ghost over here. We want to, he's still loving you. We want to get his dad, and we want to give you a T-shirt here. Send them a T-shirt right here. Right. More consciousness. Enjoy that, Danny, Florida. Oh, I love this thing. Oh, it broke me up. Oh, thank you.
So you've got two really nice examples of laughter there. You've got the first guy is laughing in an involuntary way. Something has really made him laugh and he's gone. His colleague is quite worried, but also just keeps laughing and smiling solely because of this behavioural contagion. And actually, this feeds us into something else that's quite unusual about laughter, which is that although we think we know about laughter, it's not that it's unusual, but a surprising finding about laughter. We think if you ask humans, what makes you laugh? And this is work by the psychologist Robert Provine. People will talk about, well, what makes me laugh is comedy, humor, jokes. That's what I laugh at. But in fact, most of the time, laughter has nothing whatsoever to do with jokes. Robert Provine found that people laugh most of the time just because they're in the presence of other people. So what you find with humans is, in fact, we laugh. Robert Provine found we are 30 times more likely to laugh if there is somebody else with us than if we're on our own. And we'll laugh more if we know those people, and we'll laugh more if we like those people, which means in practice, actually, most laughter happens in conversation. And in those conversations, Provine found we're still not normally laughing at jokes. We're laughing at comments and statements like, I might miss my bus, or I'll have another cup of tea. Because actually, you're using laughter very communicatively in those conversations. We're doing it a lot more than we think we do. There are not many studies of this, but every study that's looked at it finds that everybody underestimates how frequently they laugh. Everybody's laughing more than they think they do. It's all moderated socially, so you're more likely to catch a laugh from someone you know than someone you don't know. You're more likely to laugh if there's other people there than if you're on your own. You're more likely to laugh if you know those people. So it's the more social contact there is, the more laughter there will be. And what this means in practice, you look at people laughing when they're with other people, they're laughing for lots of different reasons. It can be pure contagion. You're laughing just because someone else is laughing and you've caught it. We will laugh to make and maintain social bond. It's a very common and effective use of laughter, both to make bonds with new people and to reaffirm bonds with people you already know. We will laugh in conversations to show that we agree with what's said, we understand with what's been said, we remember the same allusions, we recognize the same reference. And in fact, Provine found that at any one point in time, the person who laughs most in a conversation is the person who's talking. So people really are using laughter communicatively to get people to show that they understand, they agree, they remember, they recognize. And also, and I'll come back to this right at the end, we will laugh to reframe things as play. We will laugh to show that our intentions are playful. A stressful situation is in fact fine. There's a popular video going around in the UK at the moment of a woman falling over in the mud and then laughing a lot. And she can't get up and she falls over again and she laughs more. And she's laughing to show, look, I'm not upset and angry that you're filming me while I keep falling over. So what we have with laughter is a social emotion. Darwin thought it was joy. Panksepp says it's got this corporation of like intention to be playful. And I think if we kind of think about it, therefore, as a sort of social joy, it's an emotion that lives in interactions with other people, and its roles are primarily social ones as well as emotional. Another reason why laughter is funny is that laughter is never neutral. When you hear someone laughing, you are always trying to understand why that person is laughing. So I'm going to play you a couple of different laughs now, and I want you to listen to them and think, does that person sound like they're laughing spontaneously, like the guy on the television program, or is this person laughing more in a way that sounds a bit more maybe communicative, or they're just mirroring back someone else's laugh? So that was an involuntary laugh. That's actually my laugh. I have a really high-pitched laugh. I would love to be able to sing that high. I can't take my voice up there that voluntarily. Whereas this laugh, that laugh was more communicative. That was produced by someone sort of pretending that their friend had told a funny joke because they liked their friend. And actually, those are two different kinds of laugh, because that first one is part of that involuntary network and you can't necessarily stop it once it's started. Those more communicative laughs, they seem to be a bit more like speech in the sense that you use them very differently. And in fact, a lot of conversational laughter sounds like this. It's actually happening in a situation where you're timing it so well. People tend to laugh together at the ends of sentences, for example. There's no way that could be an involuntary vocalization, because when the involuntary laughter comes along, it tends to come along and then stay for about 2 minutes. We found when people are listening to laugh, these two different kinds of laughs, and this is a study where we're scanning people's brains and we deliberately didn't tell them it was a study on laughter, and they don't know that there are different kinds of laughs in there. There's spontaneous laughter, which here I've called real, which is a bit unfair, but like the spontaneous helpless laughter, that gives you lots more activation in blue, shown here in blue, in auditory parts of the brain. Whereas that more communicative laughter, that more intentional laughter, that actually gives you a lot more activation in the brain, but now not in auditory areas, in parts of the brain associated with the theory of mind, mentalizing, thinking about what somebody else is thinking. And all people were doing was lying in the scanner and listening to sounds. They weren't doing any tasks here. So it doesn't matter what's going on here. People, when they hear laughter, they are trying to work out what that laughter means. They're trying to say, is that a spontaneous laugh, or is that something more communicative, more intentional? And if it is more communicative, more intentional, that seems something different. And I think that's consistent with the activation. So I suspect we get more auditory activation for the spontaneous laughs, because you hear sounds you don't hear in any other context. Whereas you're getting more of this mentalizing network when you hear that kind of communicative, intentional laughter. Because when you hear someone going, there's a reason why they produce that laugh intentionally. Maybe they're trying to be friendly to someone they don't know. Maybe they're trying to show a friend that they remember a story they've told. Maybe they're trying to cover up being a bit angry. Maybe they're trying to get someone to like them. Maybe they're trying to work out if they're getting away with a lie. Maybe they're trying to cover up being in pain or angry or embarrassed. In fact, laughter is like a hall of mirrors when you start to look at how people use laughter conversationally, which means when you hear it, you're always trying to work it out. You're trying to work out if you're included in it. You're trying to work out if you're being laughed at. We have very complicated relationships with laughter. In this same study, do you remember I mentioned that study before showing priming, when you could hear the brain, see the brain getting ready to join in when you hear laughter? I thought we would get a lot more of this activation in this study when people heard the spontaneous laughter, because everybody rates that as more contagious. And that's actually not what we found. What we found was that there was variation across participants. So we took people out of the scanner and then we gave them a quick test where they had to classify the laughter in the two different types. And what we found was that the better they were at that test, the more they had activated their brain earlier when they were listening to any laughter. So it's not just contagion. If you're getting ready to join in when you hear any laughter, it's not just getting ready to join in with the laughter, it's actually helping you understand what that laughter means better. So this is very interesting, because that suggests that that is something that there could be interesting individual variation in. And of course, actually contagion is something we learn to do. All behaviorally contagious phenomena like yawning and coughing and laughing, those are things that babies don't do. We learn to do that. So again, that opens up a possibility for there to be variation, and interesting variations in adults, depending on their experience and they're young. Getting towards the end now, a couple more reasons why laughter is funny. First of all, because we learn to laugh, as I've just kind of hinted there with the contagion example. Now, obviously, we don't have to learn to laugh to produce any laughter. Babies laugh when they're tickled at around 3 months in a way that is spontaneous. So deaf and blind babies laugh when they are tickled. They don't have to have heard or seen this behavior to start doing it. But actually learning what laughter can mean, learning about all this social use of laughter, is something that we spend a lot of our early adult years learning to do. So this is just a very, very big data set. We've got like nearly 2,000 people in this across a very wide age range from sort of 3 up to 90, where we got people to classify laughter into those two different kinds of laughter. So that's spontaneous, real laughter, and that communicative, more intentional laughter. All people are doing is rating them as to whether they think it's spontaneous or not at these different ages. And what we find is that there are big age-related changes. So you ask a child of 5, is that laughter spontaneous or not? They don't know what you're talking about. They hear laughter. And very quickly, we're still analysing this data, what you find is people start to get good at spotting the spontaneous laughter by the time they're in their late teens, early 20s. But this is the curve for getting good with that more communicative laughter. And what you find, and here I've just very crudely put lines here to show you when it starts to flatten out, people don't get best at this in terms of performance until they're in their 30s, suggesting that you're spending your entire early adult life learning about this very important social signal. And of course, you have to learn about it. You can't read a book that tells you about how laughter works. You're learning about laughter and its social use in the social interactions where it happens. And you're learning about your own laughter at the same time as you're learning about other people's laughter. And it's probably one of the more important things that you learn to do. Why is laughter funny? Reason number 9. Well, because laughter makes things funnier. We did a study a couple of years ago where we took terrible jokes, really bad jokes like, what's the best day for cooking? Friday. We deliberately took real stinkers. And we got people to rate how funny they were. And they were all read by a comedian. He really went for it. So here, this is all separate jokes because there's a lot of joke-to-joke variation. The line in red is showing you how funny people rate those jokes to be. And as you can see, they're not very funny. And then we took those jokes and we edited laughter, just single person laughing from our earlier corpus of laughs onto the end. And we gave them gave those jokes to new people and we asked them to rate how funny they were. And what you find is adding any laughter to the joke makes the joke seem funnier. Those are the lines in green and blue. And the more spontaneous the laughter, that's shown in green, the funnier it makes the joke. So although people are just listening to the joke and they've been told to rate the joke, if there's laughter, you can't ignore it. Laughter is never neutral. And here in the context of the joke, it seems to have this effect of reflecting back on the laughter and making that whole joke seem funnier. And of course, one of the things that's happened since we did this study is we went into the pandemic and lockdowns, and suddenly people couldn't watch TV shows that had been filmed with live audiences or go to comedy events and see live comedy. If you were watching your live TV show, there wasn't a live audience. And if you were watching your comedy, you were doing it on Zoom. And one of the things that's been very noticeable there is it's all been a lot less funny, I think, because the laughter from the audience, either on television or in the room with you, isn't there. And it does actually affect your enjoyment. And finally, because laughter can make things better. So one of the things that's really a lovely quote about laughter is that laughter is the shortest distance between two people. And I've loved that idea because it's kind of getting to that intimacy of laughter. But it may be even more important than that. So there's a guy, Robert Levinson, who I'm sure you know better than I, has done this really lovely work looking at longitudinal studies of married couples, looking at their stress responses. So he gets them into the lab and they have to discuss a problem in their relationship while they're wired up to polygraphs. So you can see when they have to start having this uncomfortable conversation, you see both members of the couple get stressed. And what he finds is couples who deal with that stress by what he calls positive affect, but it's things like laughter and smiling, not only in the moment get less stressed, they get on top of that unpleasant feeling, and you can see this physiologically, they also are the couples who are happier in their relationship and tend to stay together for longer. And that's not because laughter is a bit of magic dust that makes everything okay, because it only works if both members of the couple laugh. So the laughter has to be shared. It has to be something that you negotiate together for it to actually have the benefit. And that probably means that it's not just the laughter that's working there, it's actually the strength of the relationship, like the ability to use laughter in that way is an index of that relationship. Robert Levinson has lots of videos of elderly couples making each other laugh while complaining about their snoring. I don't have that. This is just some young men in the former East Germany filming a promotional film for their heavy metal band, which goes wrong. What I want you to notice is what happens when things go wrong, when they expect to happen, doesn't happen. Also, I've edited out a lot of swearing, which for some reason is in English.
Kannst du gleich sehen, ich spiele da gleich sofort raus. Schön das Wasser, warte. Eis hier überall. Ne? Da überall rein. In der Mitte am besten machen. Ja. Wir sind doch wirklich jetzt nach zu Hause. Prof? Ja. And my new band is called Sophie Scott.
And his friends immediately start laughing. He starts to laugh now. So this is obviously a much more extreme version of what Robert Levins is talking about here. But if you look at the emotional tone here, they are quite serious at the start. It's quite a lot of bravado, quite a lot of bicep kissing, all this, and he's obviously looking a bit apprehensive. No one is laughing. Then as soon as things go wrong, i.e. he doesn't go through the water, the ice into the water, but smacks his backside and slides off, but also there isn't blood and bone everywhere, his friends start laughing, and it takes a couple of beats and that invitation to play starts to work, and then he starts laughing too, and suddenly this is hilarious, and we've reframed the whole thing as play, and what could have been embarrassing or painful or made someone angry is fun. This is hilarious. This is what we always meant to do. And if you don't believe me, imagine watching that video with the laughter being like that while he rolled around on the ice with a visibly broken leg pleading for help. It would be unwatchable. So people often send me this video and say, oh, it's Schadenfreude, you know, we're enjoying watching him get smacked on the backside. But actually, what you're seeing is the laughter working. You're seeing something about friendship. So I think that laughter probably should be, it's the shortest distance between two people, but it's also probably one of the more important emotional connections and expressions of that we have with people. And I think actually as psychologists and scientists, it's a very interesting area to study, because it can actually tell you, because it's this social emotion, it's an emotion that lives in interactions with other people, that's actually telling us a lot about actually the nature of the relationships we have with those other people, and maybe some of the benefits of them. In short, we should take laughter more seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Thanks. Question we want to ask before we say goodbye. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, so
Sorry.
don't be shy.
My fault.
Just go.
It's my fault. Go for it.
Oh, well. Shall I break the ice? It's a pity though, because if I break the ice, there's not much time left for you.
Does laughter reduce stress? Well, it certainly seems to. So in the Robert Levinson study, when people in a stressful situation, they're talking about a problem in their marriage, if they both laugh, what you see is that their physiological indicators of stress go down. So their galvanic skin response changes and their heart rates and heart rate variabilities change. And that's probably because when you laugh, you do get a reduction in adrenaline, and you get an increased sense of a sort of a bit of an endorphin response. So an increased uptake of endorphins. So, you know, it is de-stressing you only if you both laugh. But that seems to be the thing. It seems to be the kind of management of the shared laughter that's actually leading to these changes. But it's definitely, and actually in a wider picture, it's very common for people in high stress jobs, particularly when they've got to work in a team, like in the fire service or the police or nursing. They tend to have sometimes very dark, but very culture specific senses of humor. Specifically so, I think they have a reason to laugh together, because it helps them de-stress and it helps them bond more as a team.
We have Jarno also, who wants to ask a question.
Yes, so it's a very good question. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Scott. It was really comprehensive and interesting presentation. Perhaps my question would be that, okay, you gave 10 reasons why laughter is funny, but it might be just my lack of sense of humor that I didn't actually get why the reasons made laughter funny. So could you be...
I suppose because it's some of the ways in which it can be quite different from other things. So for example, the point about laughter being contagious, actually, although other mammals show contagious behaviors, none of them show contagious laughter. So I meant funny as in it can be different as well as it can be funny, hilarious, funny. But also I think some of it is because it's why scientists don't study it. I think it's because we make funny noises and it seems sort of trivial and silly. I think that's one of the main reasons scientists don't study it. I have colleagues who think I've lost my mind.
All righty. Yeah, thanks.
Well,
There was a question.
For studying it.
Sorry.
Kyle asked in the chat.
So there's a really good question from Carl about, can laughter widen the gap between people? And absolutely, you're totally right. This talk, I've emphasized the positive aspects of laughter, but if you think of laughter as being a way of making and maintaining social bonds, as soon as you have those social bonds, it has to mean someone is excluded by definition. And as soon as they are excluded from laughter, your relationship to that laughter changes a lot. And, you know, if you feel like if you're on a train with people having a hilarious time and all laughing together and you're not included in it, their laughter can seem a bit aversive. If they start laughing at you, it's absolutely horrible. It is one of the worst things that can happen, that sense of being laughed at. You're not only excluded, you are the focus of it. And it's horrendous feeling, absolutely horrendous. And it's very noticeable that whenever people want to sort of dehumanize other people, they very frequently make them the target of jokes. It's like a, you know, in a conceptual way, doing this ganging up and laughing at. So totally, it's incredibly powerful in both directions. It could be one of the nicest, most bonding things, and at the same time, be absolutely horrible and alienating.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Sophie, or Sophie, I don't know.
It's Sophie,
I decided Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. I'm just putting my email in the chat. If anybody's got any other questions, do feel free to drop me an email. I'm really sorry that I've got to run off now. And so there's a couple of really nice comments about laughter in the chat as well. That's really helpful. Thank you. And yeah, feel free to get in touch with me if you've got any other questions. And I'm really sorry about this. I agreed to do something later today that's moved. They keep moving it earlier and earlier and earlier. So I'm sorry about this. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.